Very warm welcome to you. Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you happen to be, to the Reactor Team Series. I'm giving a session today on the best practices for security and compliance, specifically in teams, not just in general. Part of a series, as Emma said. So the moderator today will be Emma McGrath. Just a bit about me. So I'm a UC architect with lots of experience in this space, both with UC, but also just, generally, voice. Started off with Avaya PBXs 20 years ago, and then, started doing things with Exchange and System Center and everything else, and eventually got bitten by the UC bug again with Microsoft, tail end of OCS and going into Link and Skype and now Teams. So really, it's UC is. They say it's a dated term, but I think it's got some legs on it for quite a while, really. As Emma mentioned, I'm an MVP 2 years in a row. I'm very active on social media, including Twitter and LinkedIn. I blog at UC Status. I also have a podcast called the UC Status Podcast, very imaginative title. And I'm also a conference organizer for Comsverse, which was an online conference this year. Hopefully will be an in-person conference in the new year. And again, I work for Simity, Modern Workplace Practice Lead. So the agenda is kind of a loose agenda. I was looking at the running order of the slides, and this is kind of what stood out to me. So I'll just give you a little bit of an intro into compliance and security, specifically for teams. What teams kind of gives you from a risk perspective and what's necessary for security, some specific settings that you can do in teams to govern your risk, and then some configuration for compliance itself. Ooh. And here's the intro. I didn't realize there was so much animation in these slides, so yeah. Right, so this first slide really is just to show that that data is king. Really, there's so much data being created that it's they say it's faster than anything you could ever imagine. Every couple of hours there's more data than the last 20 years worth of data or something like that. But yeah, it's kind of starts on laptops and mobile phones and PCs. It could be documents, but it could also be, chat messages. It could be social media posts, SMS or text messages, just chat in general on different chat services. And then of course, you've got sharing, again, from all those sources, but also out to social media, out to different, cloud storage. Could be via email. It could be, any number of ways. So, that really is, if you want to know what the risk is about everything, it's about the creation, but also then the sharing and what happens during the life cycle of that content, that data. And you need to kind of look at how you can manage that, manage the risk, but also just manage the data as well. So what is compliance? So I kind of say it refers to the regulations that businesses must follow to guard against theft or loss of that data. It's basically trying to figure out how to make sure that all of your data is governed, but it's not the actual the act of doing it. It is it's the guidelines that you must follow, and there's lots of different guidelines from cybersecurity to different regulations and laws. There's just your corporate values. So how do you want to be seen in the market? There's human rights, so people want to have specific rights over how they're treated and how they're treated with data. Obviously, things like GDPR with the right to be forgotten and that kind of thing kind of comes into that bucket. But all of this can be a bit of a minefield, really. So if you look at this, it's pretty fragmented landscape, quite confusing. All these different areas that you must consider really about your data. Sort of whether you're, what happens when you have a breach. There's been quite a few high-profile breaches, data breaches recently, from some big names, and really that can mean as little as, sorry, we shared something we shouldn't, to, a massive breach of lots of customer data can affect the trust that people find in you, but also, it can lead to things like fines and that sort of thing. So all of this kind of thing really comes into it. GDPR is, relatively new in all of this. I think the rest of it is pretty old when it comes to all of this subject. But even GDPR, sort of a breach of GDPR for non-compliance can cost money, and there's a calculator that goes around with it. And then what about security? So most people kind of lump the two together. So compliance and security is part of the same thing. And yes, to some extent it is part of the same thing, but really I say compliance is about defining the standards and the regulations that are surrounding it. But security is about the process that you go through to actually ensure that you're compliant. And this is just one, example of what I pulled out. This is the cybersecurity reference architecture. You can find it online at that aka.ms/mcra with some video stuff and other assets. But this is, this kind of gives you a real big picture of, exactly in Office 365 or Microsoft 365, and part of the graph and all the trust and everything else that goes with it. This is, the whole architecture reference for cybersecurity, everything that goes through, Microsoft's minds when it comes to cybersecurity and securing your data. But that leads me on to this other thing. This security and compliance it's a partnership. It's not a lone responsibility. So it's Microsoft isn't solely responsible for using that reference architecture and protecting your data. It is a partnership. So they provide some security and some guidance and lots of stuff which we'll go through in a few slides time. Anti-malware, access control, and all that kind of stuff. But you must actually wield it in a responsible way. Take that guideline and do something with it. Don't just hope that Microsoft has got your back and sit back and wait for something to happen. You actually have to enact it. So our focus today is not really on the security that Microsoft provides, although there is an element of that when we go through some of the actual individual compliance settings and areas that you can focus on. But really it's about the kind of the act of how you do it. So there's only two chapters, really. It's, one is securing teams and the other one is something else, which we'll see in several slides time, but really it's about the best practices. So I just wanted to give this as a kind of a catch-all, and I'll show this a couple of times during this this session, but really there's all these considerations when you've got security and compliance. There's about the access control, so controlling who has access to what and when and from where, for how long, that kind of thing. So things like conditional access can come into that, but there's a lot more besides that comes into that as well. Then it's about protecting the information and figuring out what you need to do to ensure that sensitive data is protected from when it's created through wherever it gets sent to, all the way across the chain. Of course, almost before all of that, you need to discover all the content and figure out, what the posture should be and that kind of thing. And then you need to, figure out the data governance. And then after that, you need to manage the risk. It's, enforcing the different compliance policies and making sure that you protect not only the data, but the users and the company and the reputation. So when we talk about teams, teams really is this single window, pick your cliche when it comes to single pane of glass and all those kind of things. But effectively, it's one tool for three different types of communications, but also then it's the collaboration side. So at its most basic implementation, it's a chat tool. It's a having conversations inside of channels and things like that, and you're sending simple messages all the way through to stickers, memes, and videos and that kind of stuff. There is one document there, but it's just one document. You don't really see everything that goes on in here, but you've got all of your recent activity in your chat and stuff like that. But this is the basic functionality. When it comes to real life, you've got multiple teams, multiple channels. Some of them might be private channels, public channels. You've got data actually going into the conversations in the threads, files. You got files in the Files tab that are just added either organically or as you migrate from another storage medium, just SharePoint on-prem or something like that. And all this data that it creates, it creates a lot of potential holes if you don't, if you're not careful. You've also got tabs, you've got third-party apps and things like that. And the App Store, 3.5 years ago when Teams was first in public preview, there was 8 or 9, maybe 10 first-party apps that you could add to it. Now there's hundreds from all manner of vendors, and all these things, not only they need to be added to your tenancy, but there's access rights that go along with it, and these apps have access to that data as well. So it's about being careful about what you let users actually get at and actually add to the whole thing, and some responsibility needs to be taken for sure. And then down here you've got upload a custom app. Not only do you have all this minefield of first-party apps from Microsoft plus third-party apps from other people, like sort of freehand. I'm not picking on them specifically, but just they're on the screen. But you've also got the ability to let users upload a custom app, which could be just, they call it side loading, but it could be an app from a vendor that hasn't bothered to put something in the store, or maybe it's an updated version of something that's not in the App Store, that kind of thing. And there's ways to control all this, which we'll go through in a short bit. So it really just means that we need to secure a lot more than just Teams. I'll build this out. So starting off with AD, so we talked about access control. So actually securing AD, to make sure that your users are protected, but also you can do things like, as it says here, you can restrict the domains that you can collaborate with, or users can collaborate with. So you might know the notion of federation. So federation can be open or closed. In a open federation thing, you don't have allow lists on either side. Effectively, anybody that knows your Teams address can send a chat message to you, place a call over the internet, and that kind of thing. You can also close that, so you can just be like an invite-only type of scenario. So if you have a business partner that you want to do business with, you can add their domain to an allow list, and that automatically closes you for federation. You're not open to everybody, you're only open to the people in the allow list. You can also restrict things like guest access. So, guest access is a great thing when you've got third-party contractors or even customers that need to interact with consultants throughout the life cycle of a project, for instance, or the support team, or any number of those things. But again, you can control all that again through Azure AD. And then the application side, as I just mentioned, there's ways to actually secure all that and which apps that users can actually add. And I've got another slide on that specifically. And then we've got SharePoint. So Teams is a collection of microservices, but the data itself has to live somewhere. So in conversations in the channels and teams themselves, that data, those files, all live in SharePoint team sites underneath the hood. So you don't necessarily have to know that or even go to the SharePoint site. They're presented nicely in a nice way inside of Teams in the Files tab anyway. But again, you can go into SharePoint and get even more granular with regards to the permissions. I'll say, use this with caution, because if you've got one set of permissions that's being managed by Teams itself, when you create a team and a channel and invite members and guests and things like that, you're automatically inviting people in, and then you can set some controls inside of Teams itself. Again, I've got a slide on that. You can go further and put granular, very, very precise settings and restrictions in SharePoint itself. which you wouldn't necessarily see in Teams. So the one that's got the most restrictions is going to win, or lose for the people that need to access that stuff. So be very careful, be very mindful of what you're setting. Then you've got OneDrive. So OneDrive, again, is another storage medium behind the actual one-to-one conversations, the actual private and multi-party chats between you and your users, and between the users and the federated parties, that kind of thing. So all the files that are there are stored in the sender's OneDrive. So again, you can take some steps to restrict the domains and enable auditing so you can see what's going on. Then we've got the Power Platform. So the Power Platform, you might not think is an obvious target, but Microsoft loves to say that everybody could be a citizen developer and build apps for line of business and that kind of thing. And there's this famous example of the Autoglass person that's been on stage at some of the big tech conferences, where he made an app that saved the company lots of money by fixing a workflow that took them outside of their norm, and he created an app that actually helped fix all that. So Microsoft loves to tell everybody that they can do this, so they take that example and they go and build an app. So you need to figure out how all that, it's not just the app itself, but what about flows inside of Power Automate, for instance. All these things can be that they really need to be restricted and governed and that sort of thing. And then again, the third-party apps. So restricting what kind of apps, whether it's you only want users to be able to install first-party. So these are Microsoft only. You can restrict by vendor. You can take all apps out of an app store and just put in the apps that you actually want in there, or you can just say that users can't install their own apps and let administrators actually go and define the apps that the business uses, pin them to the rail for specific use cases and policies and that kind of thing. But you can, there are some great controls around this. And all those five kind of slides that built out there really just shows you that you've got to secure a lot more than just Microsoft 365 and Teams. There's a lot more to it than meets the eye. So team-specific security and guidance. So this is inside of Teams itself, not in what I'll show you, the Compliance Center. This is just in Teams itself. So meetings themselves, there are some settings that you can change to allow or disable certain things. So a couple of key ones that I picked on here is cloud recording. So when you enable cloud recording, it means that you can, or the meeting organizer or internal people from your organization can hit record, and that records the meeting you're in and then saves it to Stream. Recent announcement is that storage is going to move from Stream to SharePoint and OneDrive, but it doesn't really matter. It's about the recording. Then it's about what happens with that recording after it's done. So having it internally is probably okay, but you also then need potentially to share that out. So I do a lot of demonstrations for third-party apps inside of Teams and Teams itself, and a lot of times I'll send an invite to the key stakeholder. They'll forward it to their key stakeholders, but invariably there's 1, 2, 3 people that couldn't attend on the day, so they asked me to record it and then send them a link to the recording after it's done. So they've given me the permission to not only record it and record the questions and answers and that sort of thing, but then share it with them. What they do with that recording afterwards, I guess, is their responsibility, but it's also my responsibility. So I'll make sure that maybe when I do share it, I'll share it from OneDrive and I'll secure it so that maybe they can't download it. They'll just share the link and they'll play it in the browser just there. But again, it's a handshake agreement that you need to have between you and the people that you're presenting to. And the other one is about control. So that when you share your screen, as I'm doing now, if this was a normal Teams meeting, I could give the right to an external party to actually give control of their screen, so I can move their mouse and and that kind of thing, or I can give them control over my mouse and keyboard. The nice thing about Teams is you actually do get 2 mouse cursors, and you can, if you want to, you can fence or pugil or whatever you want to call it. But you know, that's another way of restricting what the users themselves are allowed to do, specifically in meetings. And there's a lot more coming around this as well, about roles and responsibilities in meetings, you know, from organizers to presenters to participants, and that kind of thing. Again, more about meetings. You got the participants and guests. You've got the lobby control. So when you start a meeting, you know, do you want people to just crash straight into the meeting, or do you want them to have to knock first? In my mind, the lobby is a great thing. You know, I guess it depends on who you're meeting with. So, for instance, you might want to set it so that people inside your organization are automatically admitted. You know, after all, you work with them. But anybody outside has to actually wait in a lobby until you've admitted them. For messaging itself, another probably not particularly obvious one is about editing and deleting sent messages. So I've picked on, you know, deleting sent messages, but you know, you can set it so that owners can delete any sent message, not just their own, but all sent messages. And to me, you know, if somebody says something they shouldn't, and you know, you have the ability to clean that up afterwards. You know, sometimes you might want to, because maybe it's particularly damaging. You might want to, you know, elevate somebody to give them that control to do that. But you know, maybe it's not a blanket thing that somebody can just go and say something and then delete it, because you know, what happens if somebody says something, one person reads it, is offended by it, and then they delete it to cover their tracks? The evidence is lost unless you've got some sort of auditing turned on. And then editing messages, you know, I think editing messages is a good thing, because, you know, maybe it's not about changing the sentiment of what you said. For me, it's correcting the this weird thing when I type the word the. It always comes out first as TEH, so I invariably have to go back and edit that. I wish there was I know there's a spell checker built in, but I wish it would just automatically replace that word. That's one for the user voice. But you know, the amount of time I just hit the up arrow after I've sent a message, and then you know, correct a couple of things is always a good thing. So I'd always leave that on, but it's something to definitely consider. And then we've talked about apps a couple of times. So you can see here you've got the ability to allow Microsoft apps. You can allow or deny third-party apps, and then of course you've got the custom apps. So this is the ability to actually upload or sideload, as they call it, an app, and you get the same drop-down list here in all 3 of these. So you can block all apps, specific apps from whatever, and then you've got, you know, this is in the permissions policy, and then you've got the setup policy, which I don't have a screenshot for, where admins can actually publish a list of apps that they trust and they know that users need to use. So that brings us on to chapter 2. If this was a normal Teams meeting, I'd pause here and ask if there were any questions, but you know, obviously that's going to be going into the Q&A, and we'll get to those in a bit, but we'll just move on. And again, just a little reminder, there's this slide again, identity access and information protection and all that kind of stuff. It's still very relevant. It's to both security and compliance. So where do you start? So first off, and I don't have a slide that says this, but I might as well just say it anyway, that Teams is and Microsoft 365 for that matter, is actually secure by design. So there's all kinds of stuff that's built into Microsoft 365 that is about security. So, you know, encryption, for instance, every bit of communication that goes everywhere is encrypted in transit and at rest inside of the actual file store when it gets there. The actual media is encrypted as well. So, you know, an audio and video call between 2 users or a federated party, and even PSTN for that matter, is encrypted. So, you know, all these things are actually built in to be very secure anyway, and there's lots of guidance and lots of there's a whole security center that shows you, and I've got some resources in a slide toward the end as well. So there's a whole section in Microsoft 365 about security in general, but also then specifically about security in Teams. The Compliance Center is relatively new. I want to say it's kind of maybe six or 8 months old, and maybe it was in preview prior to that, but it was added relatively recently, and it's about getting and checking on the viability of the security and how secure you actually are, and actually getting a score for how secure you are. This is just a screenshot. It's actually in my tenant, but it's a tenant of one and some fake users, so I'm not particularly concerned about that number. But there's all kinds of stuff that you can do in there. There's a whole compliance manager inside the Compliance Center to allow you to do things like discovery, but also some extra settings. So if nothing else, go and have a look at this link. And then there's some specific compliance pillars, if you like, and I'm just going to go through them. And this is just how they're listed actually in the Microsoft Docs site. So to start with, we've got information barriers. So information barriers can sometimes be called an ethical wall. So this is where you've got a large organization that needs to put up boundaries around specific people or groups of people. For instance, you might want to insulate the execs and the C-levels from information workers or people way down the totem pole. You might not want somebody to just send a message specifically to the very top bods in our organization, but that's going to differ from organization to organization. I did some consultancy for a large marketing firm where they had operating companies all around the business, and being a marketing company, one operating company might be doing an advert for one brand of cola, and the other one might be doing a marketing campaign for a different brand of cola. So you don't want to let the data flow between them, but you also don't want the users to be able to to chat between those boundaries as well. So you put up walls around all of them, and this in Teams is called information barriers, and it's easy to set up. There's a specific license that's required for it, but you can completely segment people so they're completely hidden from the directory. You can't find them in the global address list. You can't chat with them, and you can't join meetings where somebody with a wall around them that you're not allowed to breach is in. And it applies for guest users as well. So you can actually, even though a guest user isn't a licensed user, you can actually apply the information barrier to them as well. So if you add a guest to a channel about one brand of cola, and they can't speak to the people in the other channel or the other team for the other brand of cola. Retention policies. So this is about the files themselves, but also for Teams chats and channels and that kind of thing. So you need to, I mean, a team, you might want to say that you create a team and it's for life, but really it's not. You might have some general, maybe company-wide teams or org-wide teams that are that have a long shelf life. The information there is constantly moving, constantly updated. HR stuff and policies and parties and all those kind of things. But project-specific things, you might not need to keep it for forever. So you need to decide for how long that team is actually kept, and then what happens after the team has reached the end of its usefulness. So again, it could be archived, it could be deleted completely, but it's really up to you to decide. You can also set policies to delete and archive Teams channels and data after a period of inactivity. So maybe you don't know how long that team is around, and you're not going to leave it up to the owners or the members to police it and do something about the actual retirement of it. But maybe IT, you want to do something where that team is first it's hidden, And then if somebody complains that it's hidden and can't find it, then you kind of reactivate it. But then after another period of time, you can, put that in a recycle bin, for instance, where it can still be retrieved if absolutely necessary. But at least you've given the users and the members and the owners a chance to get stuff out that they need. Then there's communication compliance. So this is all about the policies that govern what can be said to whom. It's not about information barriers, but as you can see here, it's about potentially it's offensive language. So maybe you want to have controls around who can say swears. Really, it shouldn't be used in a business context anyway, but I'll leave that up to you and your policies and your customers' policies. But it could also be sensitive information. You could put it in a keyword filter for a project that should be really top secret, that it shouldn't be used outside of a specific group, and you can redact that as it's actually coming in. But there's lots of policies and grades of ways that you can actually control this. So from actually alerting and reporting on it, so alerting that somebody's actually said something they're not supposed to actually alerting the user that said it. So you've John Spartan, you've been fined 1 credit in the verbal morality code from Demolition Man, kind of springs to mind, right through to actually notifying a manager, supervisor, somebody in control that they've committed an infraction, right through to actually deleting the data as it's being sent, actually deleting the whole message that contained the either offensive or sensitive information. And this might be down to internal regulations, but it could also be regulatory standards. And then you've got, this is a relatively new one. This is probably only going back about, I want to say 6 months, maybe slightly longer. You've got policy-based recording. So it's no secret that Microsoft is working on a set of APIs to allow third-party vendors to actually add some richness and extra capabilities to Teams. And one of them that is out now and available for purchase is policy-based recording. And this is where a bot that lives in Azure gets conferenced into calls of users with this policy, and then it sends the media from that call, whether it's voice or video or screen sharing or even their instant messages and texts, through to a recording server where it's saved and archived and allows people with specific rights to go back and play that back. So there's an app, there's a policy, and there's obviously some governance around how long that information is retained. So this is automatic recording as opposed to this cloud-based recording in stream. There's no user intervention to actually start the recording. There's even policies and governance around, if the recording service isn't available, the user isn't allowed to make a call because there's a law that prohibits them from making and receiving calls when they're not recorded for the protection of the company. And again, it's probably around regulatory compliance. And there's a few other kind of buckets in there. So there's convenience, there's functional, and there's the lawful intercept, where you might be under surveillance from somebody, whether it's a compliance person internally, or it could be an actual a governing body for some reason. And then you got data loss prevention. Okay, there we go. So DLP, as it stands for, is about blocking sensitive content, and then making sure that the right people have access to it. So there's a bunch of policies that you can set. You can actually turn it on, and then you can create actual rules around it. So again, email notification, notifying specific number of people. You can allow overrides for specific people. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with it. And then what happens when you've breached that? You can send a message. So this is just I think it's probably an adaptive card of some description that sends in Teams, and it just tells you what you've done wrong and what you can do about it. So you can give the right to actually override and send the message, or you can report it to the admin saying it's a false positive so that they can retrain or reconfigure the DLP policies themselves. And really that was kind of it at a high level. There's a lot more stuff you can do around security. There's things like e-discovery, which I didn't really think that would fall into this. This is more about the compliance itself, as we've defined in the beginning of the session. Security is about the governance around it, the kind of regulations and being able to adhere to that, and the compliance is the settings that you need to make sure that you're in compliance itself. So I've just put up some resources here, some really good videos, and some link there to the actual team security and compliance site. It's a very good site with everything that you could conceivably configure when it comes to teams, and everything that you've thought of, and even things that you haven't. And it's being updated all the time. So when this deck was first created 4 or 5 months ago, there were 3 or 4 sections that weren't even in the deck because they weren't available yet. So it's constantly updating. So please go bookmark it and read it, and then set yourself a schedule to go and read it again. Also, the Compliance Center, again, get very familiar with the Compliance Center, know your score, know your customers' scores, and make sure that that you're safe. And then there's some really good videos. So there's some Microsoft first-party videos on the security and compliance, and then there's a deck that goes with it. And then there's some Microsoft Mechanics YouTube stuff, again, on security and compliance. Some really good stuff. And there's a lot more besides. So there's a lot of content that comes out of these online conferences. Microsoft Inspire and Ignite, for instance, would have had some specific sessions on this as well. And of course, there's my session now, which you'll find on YouTube in the coming days. So I just wanted to thank you and just say that we're, as it says there, please go and tell me how I did, whether it's good or bad. Don't worry about being kind, just be honest. We'd love to hear how we could have done better, or we'd also like to hear, if possible, what we did right. So again, go to aka.ms/the Reactor or Reactor/survey, and then there's an event code 11706. I don't know if the slides themselves or the deck is actually being shared afterwards. We can ask Emma in a second. And join the community. So, meetup.com/Microsoft Reactor London to have information on upcoming events. Follow the Twitter channel. There's a specific YouTube channel, as Emma mentioned, where all of these recordings will be saved. So if you missed it, or have a friend that missed it and you want to share it with them, or you just want to watch it again, why not? I might watch it again, even though I presented it, just to see how I did. Yeah, go to that YouTube channel, and if you want to sign up to the mailing list, it's there as well. The Reactor is in London. There's reactors all over the world, I believe, but the one in the Reactor is a lovely space. After all of this nonsense with the current climate and COVID and coronavirus and everything else, then hope definitely to see you there. It's a great space for learning and interacting. And again, just a little thank you from me. Just a reminder, I'm Randy, an MVP. That's my email address. Feel free to send me an email if you have any specific questions about, what I do, what I said. Visit my blog if you like, ucstatus.com. Follow me on Twitter if you like. And again, just a reminder of who I work for, because they've given me the time to come and present this to you. And that leaves me with the Q&A. So I think I'm a little bit early on time. Just open the Q&A on the other screen.
Andy, thank you so much for your session. I've been keeping an eye on the Q&A, and there hasn't been lots posted in there, but we do still have a few minutes. So for those of you who are online now is the chance to ask any questions that you have to Randy. So it's just come through there. Actually, I've posted that.
Right. So how safe is it to store files on Teams being a cloud-based storage, and are meeting recordings saved on stream always, or this can be managed by administrators? So the first part of that question is how safe. You know, as I said, Microsoft goes to great lengths to actually make sure that the Microsoft 365 itself and all of the services that it delivers in there, whether it's SharePoint for storage, whether it's OneDrive for storage, even SQL on the back end, can be considered storage. Everything in there is very secure, but again, it's still a partnership. You need to make sure that you don't leave the keys to the storage, or you govern the information as it goes out or as it's been shared. So, for instance, I share a lot of files with guests in Teams, and that's because of the nature of what we do. Sometimes we have to send larger files, and yes, I can email it out, but then that becomes a new asset, if you like. Sharing it with a federated party or a guest user or a customer, partner, whoever it might be, in one place means that we can potentially work on the same document and co-author and those sort of things. Lots of benefits around there. So keeping it there means that it's not going to be shared out. You can also restrict people from being able to download it or actually further share it. There's lots of governance that you can do around that. And OneDrive is no exception. Again, I do demos for specific customers, and these demos that could run for an hour and a half to 2 hours. Some of these are big kind of 400 or 500 meg files in some cases, and clearly it's not possible to email that out. But again, I could just save that to OneDrive and then share a link. I could even have some extra security on that so that only specific people can open that link and get out the file. I can set an expiry on the actual lifetime of the link. I can set a password on the link. I can do all of those things. So it is very secure, but you can make it even more secure using the partnership, as I mentioned before. And again, the administrators have lots of different controls, as I've shown. Some of the things I've shown you in this as well. Can this be managed by an administrator in an organization? So grateful for the information. Thank you very much. Appreciate the kind words. Moving on. Again, it's just a thank you. Thank you. Thank you for attending. The event code 11706, as Emma says. Does OneDrive offer additional safeguard solutions in support of regulatory compliance needed for specific industries? Yeah, if you go to that, let me bring it up. If you go to the security and compliance link here, there is a bunch of stuff around that, but also then further links onto how it pertains to the actual regulations themselves, the actual specific things like the HIPAA and GDPR, and a bunch more besides. And if you use things like third-party vendors, again, there are other regulations that you need to be mindful of that aren't necessarily about data compliance, but they're about regulatory compliance. So I mentioned things like policy-based recording, being able to store that for a specific lifetime. That would fall under things like the MiFID II, that kind of stuff. But there's a whole bunch of guidelines on docs on how to do that. If we are sharing the deck out, I might add a specific page on the actual guidelines or a link to all the guidelines. And that's it so far. Please keep the questions coming. We've got a bit more time. Always wonder what to do in these awkward silences.
Thanks, Randy. Just to jump in, I just had a question about the slides. If you are happy to share them, is that something that we could send out to people who've attended today?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, okay.
Nothing in there that's secret or anything, so.
Brilliant, okay. So maybe we can work on getting that sent out with the YouTube link for later this week. And like I do with the YouTube link, I'll post that in the meetup group. So that's where we can share that to you.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. I don't see any more questions coming through. There is always a chance to ask us any follow-up questions on Meetup, or as Randy pointed out, there's ways to reach out to him directly too. If you did think of any other questions. I have posted the link to the YouTube playlist in the Q&A. So that's where all of these sessions are being uploaded to and will continue to be uploaded to until the series comes to an end. So you can watch them back anytime you like. So yeah.
Happy to wait 5 more minutes, just in case. Assuming there's attendees still.
Yeah, we still have lots of people online. So just another question has come through there from Safa.
One more, please. How many max presenters can be in one live event? Ooh, that's a good question. So there's 2 different roles. There's obviously, well, actually 4 roles if you really count. The organizer, then there's the producer and the presenter, but then also you've got participants. Because I ran a conference called Commsverse, and we ran 230 plus live events. Some of the sessions had, they all had one producer. Some sessions, like keynotes and things where the organizers were speaking, had up to 5 producers that could also present. And then some of the sessions had, up to 4 or 5 different presenters there. You can only show one at a time. Everybody can open their mic, but you can only present one video feed at a time and one screen share at a time. You can't kind of have dual screen or have multiple video feeds. That's something that is definitely an ask from the community. And again, if you want to know, want to add more or want to add to that number, then there's always user voice. So I don't know the actual number. I'm sure I could find the answer if I looked quickly, but I don't know how many you want. Feels like we should have some elevator music.
Okay, I don't see any more questions coming through. If you haven't already done so, now might be a good chance to fill out our survey, which doesn't take very long at all. So the link to that, I can actually post that in the Q&A, and the event code is 11706. So let me type that in.
There we go.
Great. Okay. Great. Okay, I don't think there's anything else coming through. I'll keep an eye on the meetup over the next few days, see if there's any follow-up questions. But Randy, it was so great to have you on the Reactor and delivering this session and being part of this series. Thank you so much for being part of it. And hopefully we have you back again in the near future, delivering another session. But I guess we can give people back a few more minutes of their day if there's no further questions. Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much again, everyone, for attending, for all of your questions, and to Randy as well. And hopefully we will see you all at the next Reactor session.
Thank you.